Welcome to the Phase Transition Podcast. Today, I'm honored to have as my guest Dr. Cyndi Matthews. She's a licensed professional counselor supervisor, a nationally certified counselor, a certified clinical trauma professional working with individuals, couples, and families. She graduated with a PhD and a master's in counseling from Texas A&M University Commerce. She has over 20 years of clinical experience. She uses cognitive behavioral therapy as well as Adlerian therapy. She focuses on a person-centered therapy approach, emulating the values of empathy, genuineness, and non-judgment. As a supervisor, she is also taking on intern working towards their license. In her private practice, she specializes in religious abuse and cult recovery, depression, anxiety, stress, LGBTQ+ issues, gender identity, post-traumatic stress disorder, sexual, emotional, and physical abuse, anger management, domestic violence, sex therapy, premarital counseling, communication skills, crisis management, and relationship effectiveness. Dr. Cyndi Matthews is also a friend of mine. In this episode, we have an open, honest conversation about her upbringing as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, why she left, and what motivated her to really focus her research on survivors of spiritual abuse and survivors of different cults. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did having this conversation with Dr. Cyndi Matthews. Thank you very much, Cyndi, for joining me today on the Phase Transition Podcast. I'm super excited to have you. I've been wanting to have you on the podcast so you could share your perspective about many different things that we'll be talking about. So we'll be learning a little bit about you. We'll be learning today about spiritual abuse, and it will be a very natural conversation between you and I, and hopefully, our listeners can really get something out of this that is, I hope, helpful to them. So as usual, I will ask you maybe to start a little bit with introducing yourself so you can tell us where you're from, where you grew up, what is your relationship with, the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a little bit of your journey, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, what made you step out of the church, and we'll end this little portion here with what you're doing today, and where you're at in life today.
Sure, sounds great. I'm pleased and excited to be a part of this. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Right now, I live in Dallas. I don't claim Dallas, but I'm originally from Canada and grew up in Canada and Australia. Grew up Mormon, what we used to call Mormon, in the LDS Church. My mother had joined the LDS Church when she was 16 in Australia and tried to enter the United States because, the missionaries were like, you've got to go to the US, that's the promised land. They couldn't get visas, so they ended up in Canada, and my dad met her there in Canada. He's Canadian. And he joined the church when he was like 19, and they got married very, very young. He was in the Air Force, so she was 19, he was like 21, and they had babies right away, but immediately had like 5 children. So we were in Canada and Australia growing up, and it's really interesting. I didn't find out till I went to BYU that people from Utah called that the mission field. I had no idea.
Which one? The Canada was the mission field?
Canada and Australia were seen
both.
as the mission field.
Oh, okay. So would you go back to Australia to visit family, or?
So we moved there. My dad was in the Air Force in Canada. And so when I was like 8, we moved there because my mother's brother, who became president of the Sydney Temple and the Perth Temple, he's like, we have plenty of jobs. Don't worry, come out here to Australia. So we lived there for a number of years and grew up there.
How was that? Did you enjoy it?
Oh my goodness, of course, yes. It was lovely. It was beautiful. We were in Perth and lived a quarter mile from the beach, went to the beach almost every day. Yeah, it was an absolutely wonderful experience.
It looks beautiful.
But of course, everything was tied into the church. You know, not being able to swim on Sundays was a huge disparity between those who were from Australia and us, and just the way of life. And yeah, it was really interesting. I was young growing up there, but I just remember comments about it's an American church and somehow we have to make it an Australian church. And there was a lot of kind of angst amongst those who were not from Australia in the church.
So how big was the congregation over there? Was it
we had a ward. It wasn't a branch. So it was a ward and it was pretty big. And my uncle was not the branch president, the stake president at the time. And yeah, everybody knew each other and there was a lot of intermarrying, but it was a nice place. It was a lovely place. And then we moved back to Canada because my dad saw us all kind of leaving the church. There were 5 of us and he saw us leaving. I had 4 brothers and my older brothers, my first one actually left at 16. And then the next 2 brothers were kind of like, I'm not really interested. And my dad got really worried. He's like, I need to take you back to Canada so you can stay in the church.
Right.
And that there can be more of that emphasis on both. He wanted us to go to BYU. He wanted us to, you know, go on missions. Not me, because I'm the girl.
Right, like follow the path, follow the proper...
Right. And he didn't see that happening a lot with people over there. It wasn't the norm to go on missions. It wasn't the norm, you know, and there wasn't a temple at that time in Australia. People had to go to New Zealand and it was really hard to get the temple marriage and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that was the 70s. So that was
right. That's quite a trek. Like how many hour flight is that to go from where you were to New Zealand?
I never made it, so I don't know. I was too young, but people they would get married in Australia civilly, and then they would have to go to New Zealand and then come back. And it was just this big thing of, you know, the civil marriage and, you know, paying that money and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that was a huge deal. That was a big undertaking to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So, and then at what age did you move back to Canada then?
So I think I was about 15.
Okay.
14, 15, just finishing up middle school, going to high school, and young women's. It was really weird to go to young women's and actually have a large group of people in my young women's class. And my oldest brother stayed in Australia. He never came back to the church, and he married an Australian. And then my next 2 brothers came back. They were a little older. They finished out high school, went down to what was Rick's College at the time, which is now BYU, Idaho.
Right.
And then went on missions. Yeah, and so we started following the path that my dad specifically had in mind. My mom was a little more laid back.
Okay, so your older brothers who went to Rick's College, BYU, Idaho, they are still active in the church?
No, one of them is he went down to BYU, married someone who was a new member of the church, and now they live in Idaho and they have 7 kids, and he's a bishop, and yeah, he's very active, and actually, interestingly enough, he's very critical of the rest of the family. He's probably the most critical, non-accepting, which is really strange when you look at the
fact that he's a bishop. And so is he the only one then from your siblings who is still active, or do you have others?
Yeah, he's the only one who's still active. So the next brother, after his mission, he was just like, I have so many problems with this. He went to Germany.
Okay.
And he just struggled with what he saw, the Americanized church, with the money, all the different things. And so he came back from his mission, and he left pretty soon after his mission. And
what
then,
do you mean with the money? Like, what did he see
oh,
during
just
his
he saw the LDS Church as a corporation. He saw it
Okay.
as a business, and I don't know how he got the information, but he saw things that we didn't see back then before the internet. And just the business holdings and the money that people had, and maybe he was he wasn't the assistant to the president on his mission, but he was doing all of the clerical stuff.
Right. If he was working in the office, he would have access to all the spendings for the missionary and how things are managed.
Yeah, and he saw a lot of stuff and I tried to put it out of my mind. I didn't leave till I was 43, but I tried to put it out of my mind and kind of like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You know how we do,
right? Right.
But he's just trying to find problems. But he came back, and he was just like, yeah, I'm gonna try, but I can't, and he left.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then I went to BYU, and my younger brother, who also went on, I had 4 brothers. So the younger brother went on a mission, and he stayed pretty active. He didn't leave until probably last year.
Oh, wow. So very recently too.
Yeah, very recently. And I left probably 13 years ago.
Okay. And then he's the youngest, that was your youngest brother who left last year.
Yeah, he and his wife, it's really interesting because my parents died. My mom died 10 years ago. My dad died 8 years ago. And it's really uncomfortable when there's deaths in the family, when you've got part LDS and part not.
Right.
Just how do you do things? How do you do funerals? How do you get along? And no different for our family. It was really uncomfortable. And the bishop brother, who wasn't a bishop at the time, but very stalwart LDS, he just kind of took over everything. And when my mom passed away, my dad ended up taking everyone who wasn't going to church out of the will. And that brother, the bishop brother, was like, no, we'll put you back in. I'll be the spiritual one. And but then the baby brother, who was still in, and they kind of tried to coordinate everything. It got really ugly.
Oh, no.
It wasn't pretty. I wasn't treated nice. My kids weren't treated nicely. And because I had left at that time. And so it's really interesting a year ago to get this call from my sister-in-law saying, so how did you leave?
After all these years, right?
Right.
That's how it is. And we'll come back to that. I want to get more into, so you went to BYU, you said, when you came back from, I want to try to keep it chronological a little bit here so that we can follow.
I went to Rick's College first because my brothers had gone to Rick's.
Okay.
And it was really interesting because in high school, my dad taught at my high school. And my dad was a misogynistic, patriarchal jerk, to be quite honest. And the only reason he saw me getting education was so that I could get married. You know?
So that was your way to be among all the worthy priesthood leader and find the right one.
Yeah, and I liked dating. I had a good time dating. I was like, sure. So I was like, oh, I'll go to Rick's. That's where my brothers went. And so my dad taught at my high school, and my high school counselor was like, you need to go to a university. You've got the grades, you need to get a 4-year degree, and you need to get a career. Don't go to, and Rick's was a 2-year at the time. And she's like, you need to go beyond a 2-year. You're smarter.
Bright. You're bright. You're bright one. Don't waste it.
and I didn't see that. I was just kind of like, well, I'm going to school. Nobody really explained, because I was female. They didn't explain what's the difference between a college and a university.
Oh, wow. So you didn't know.
I didn't, and nobody explained I really didn't have a sense, so not that bright, obviously. I didn't have a sense of the careers that I could have, the things that I could do. I didn't know the path or process for getting into university and college. It was just kind of like, and that's 38 years ago.
So was your father handling all that then? Was he the one
No, I did it. I had to work. I had to pay for everything. He helped pay for all my brothers because my brothers were going to have careers. And I
Oh,
just went because they were going.
oh wow.
So
That's
I had to figure it out. And it's actually one of my boyfriend's fathers up in Calgary, uh, who was like, you should go to BYU. He said it too. And I was like, no, I'm going to go to Rick's. And he was like, you should go to I guess they had BYU Rick's nights for a fireside or something. You should go to that and figure out how to do it. You
mm.
should take the ACT. And I was like, what's the ACT? I don't
Oh
even
wow.
know what that is.
It was that bad, huh?
It really was. And so he was kind of helping me through the process. And I figured it out, and I applied, and I got in, and it was like, oh, well, this is cool. I get to go to Rick's. And yeah, I really didn't think much of what I wanted to do. And my dad was like, well, if you are going to go, A, you've got to find a husband, and B,
Mm.
get on the path for becoming an elementary school teacher, because that's really, that's what women do. They either become secretaries or elementary school teachers.
Right. Or family, like home and family, whatever, that
Right.
therapist or something like that.
But I went to Rick's for a year, and it was like it was a party the whole time. I didn't do great in grades, and it was like, if I'm going to do something more, I think I need to go somewhere else. So I ended up applying to BYU and got in there, and I actually started in elementary education there. And I was
Okay.
like, well, I really wasn't happy there. So I started looking at other things. I think I went through 6 different majors. But
Oh wow.
it was really helpful though, because I was the one paying for it. I
Mm-hmm,
would
mm-hmm.
work summers, and I would work while I was in school, because I was paying for it, even though my dad was saying, this is the degree you need, or this is what you need to be doing. I could kind of blow him off, because it's like, I'm paying for it. I can
Right.
decide.
I will choose what I want to do. So that's very interesting. So what did you end up getting your degree in then?
So I got my bachelor's. I got 2 in human resource development, in communications, and also in psychology. So I did the combination of both. But right in the middle, they were switching the human resource development over to the business program.
Mm.
And so I started looking at the business. So it actually comes on, it was communications, and they switched it to business. And so I was like, this is really cool. I like this business thing. And so I ended up getting a master's in organizational behavior and business
Mhm.
from BYU. And that was, and I got married right in between the bachelor's and the master's degree.
So, so how was your experience at BYU? Did you enjoy it? Did you have a good time there?
I had a lovely time in my undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
I had a wonderful time. I had good wards.
Did you stay in one of those dorms like Hilleman Hall or whatnot, Deseret Towers?
I did not. I always
Oh, was
liked.
that even there? I don't know.
Yeah, they were there. I'm not that old.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, so I stayed in apartments. It was always my deal that I wanted to be even at Rick's. I didn't stay
Mm-hmm.
in the dorms. There were too many
Okay.
rules for me, and I'm kind of an anti-rule
Yeah,
person.
I was the same way. I stayed in I was in Hilleman Hall. Like those were, wait, no, I wasn't. No, I wasn't in Hilleman. I forget. But I was in apartments close to campus, but not dorms, and then house with friends, which was the best.
Right? So I was either in, like at Rick's, I was in a house with friends, or I was in apartment complexes where I didn't have to be constantly monitored, or people telling me when I had to come in, or
Yeah.
be in bed or whatever.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. I don't think I could have handled that. Especially because I went on a mission, so I was a bit older when I went. I was already in my early 20s, and I'm like, no, I can't do that. Anyway, so good that you at that point you still very much like a true believer, and everything's good. You just kind of.
Oh, absolutely. Undergrad, definitely. I was a true believer. I was really anti my father, I always got in trouble because I spoke up a lot.
Mm,
And I wanted to get education for the sake of education. Like when I was at Rick's, I was engaged 2 times. One for each semester, you know.
That's awesome. and then, oh no.
but I would get in trouble from bishops or from guys or priesthood holders or RMs or whatever you want to call them, because I wanted to get education for the sake of education. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I really wanted to learn. And so when I would talk about, yeah, I want to go on and I want to get a bachelor's degree and maybe even a master's, and wouldn't it be cool if I got a PhD in something? And just this real resistance from the guys, especially the last guy I was engaged to at Rick's. It was just this, no, that's not what you do.
It doesn't feel right.
Right. And so that's where the resistance came. And I always spoke up, and in my classes, and like one of my English professors at Rick's, she was like, you've got a mind, you've got to use it. And I can see that often you have thoughts and you're scared to say something. And I'm like, well, yeah, I usually get in trouble.
She could tell you were repressing some of your thoughts, feelings, or...
Yeah, she did. And she had a big conversation with me about it. And I still remember that. And I went home and told my parents about it. And my dad was just completely incensed by it.
Wow. Because you wanted to pursue, like...
Yeah, that she would be putting me on this path of pursuing education. And he was like, yeah, it's good. Get it if you need it. And if something happens to a husband, you got to get the husband first. So,
yeah. Oh, wow. That's very, very patriarchal.
Extremely
mentality.
Yeah. And he would give me blessings, father's blessings, every time I would go off to school. So I got a lot of them, but it was always, you're on the wrong path. You need to go this path. Your father knows the best path for you.
Wow.
So the father's blessing was often used as a means
of control and manipulation. Yes. Wow.
That's very much control and manipulation. But yeah, so then I went to BYU, and I just really enjoyed my undergrad. I dated a lot. I had a lot of friends, loved my classes. Undergrad was great. And then I got married, and then I started a master's degree, and then everything changed because I was treated so differently. Everything became different.
How different?
Well, for one thing, I was a married woman, and I was in married wards. And my husband was getting his master's degree in engineering. I married, we've been married 34 and a half years, close to 35. And I married somebody who was, I wanted a partner. I wanted something very different than my own parents had. And I love my mother very much. We're very, very good friends, but I didn't like the way she was treated. And I wanted a partner, and I married a partner. I married somebody who, you'd say we're equally yoked, or we do everything, we make all the decisions together. But when we started going to the married wards, of course, the married women are supposed to get pregnant right away. They're supposed to stop going to school. They're supposed to, most of the married women were working to support their husbands, to go to school, and they were supposed to have babies. We decided I was going to get my master's. He was working on his master's. We would get articles put in our post box, in our letterbox, about how I'm supposed to be home and having babies.
Like from whom? From like your visiting teacher or home teachers?
Visiting teachers and ward members. And
you're doing it wrong.
I'm doing it wrong.
You're going down the wrong one.
Right. And the bishops would call us in. I remember at least 3 different times. We were there, we married in 85 and we left in 89. So over 4 years, we were in probably 3 wards, but at least 3 different bishops calling us in. And my husband's not this stalwart priesthood holder. He's not Peter Priesthood, never has been. And just calling him in and saying, you need to testify to your wife, and you need, and they would talk to him. And if I would answer, they'd try to brush me off and try to talk to him. And he'd be like, she's answering, listen to her.
She can talk for herself. She has a mouth and a mind.
Right? And so it was really ugly. We didn't have our first child till 91. So we didn't have until 6 years after we'd been married. And we had some miscarriages in there, but everybody's business was whether I was having, it's everybody's business
Yes.
asking if
Oh
I
my
was having
goodness.
a baby.
It's pretty heavy. Like I've observed this for myself. I mean, I was a bit older when I had my first child. I think I was 29. And you do want that because, I did my undergrad, and then, I kind of went the way of, let the husband finish and expand and, get the career and whatnot, and you kind of in the background. But we chose that together. But I do remember, kind of the pressure of, even a family ward, and everybody's having little kids running around, and you're like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, not that, and I wanted that really bad, like, but I do see how you kind of pushed on that path, and for some people, it's not the path that
Right.
they would that they would naturally choose, or maybe later, or maybe not. Like, anyways, yes. So I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it was really, the ward was rough. The wards were rough, and we kept trying to find another one, and they still didn't fit.
Mm-hmm. And at that point, you still lived in Utah?
Yeah, we were in Provo Norm finishing up some degrees. And my husband started pursuing his PhD and stuff, and I was just finishing up my master's. And my master's in business, I had a cohort. There were 15 of us in the organizational behavior, and 3 were females and 12 were males.
Okay.
And we were side by side by the MBA program. And the MBA program was almost solidly male. I mean, very few females, but we were taking a lot of the same classes back and forth. And our professors for organizational behavior, it was definitely, let's look at the damage that organizations can do to people. Yes, we want people to be productive, but let's look at what organizations are doing and what they're doing to hurt. Whereas the MBA program was more, here's finance, here's marketing, here's business. How do you succeed in business? And we were more, let's look at what's working and what's happening with people. And most of my professors in the OB program, organizational behavior, were kind of anti-organization. Just organizations can be oppressive, organizations can be controlling, and it takes away individuality. And we looked at diversity and discrimination, and it just really fit with who I was. And it was really interesting because anytime I'd take classes with the MBA students, and I taught undergrad classes at the same time, business classes, just the discrimination that I would get from the MBA students and the undergrad business students was very difficult, but the support that I got from the OB professors was pretty phenomenal. It was
so you're talking about discrimination for being a woman in the program?
Yes, absolutely. And why don't I have children, and why am I not home, and what, you're married, and what are you doing?
Yeah.
The whole fact that I was a woman, and especially when I was teaching the undergrad classes. Oh my goodness.
Wow. That's like overt. Yeah.
Overt. And you get these return missionaries who are just like, oh my goodness, you should not be here. I can't listen to you. And I would grade their papers. Yeah, I'd grade their papers and all this resistance if you don't have a right to be talking like that. And so
that's pretty strong. I don't think, that was still in place. Maybe, that probably died off by the time.
I would hope so.
But also I wasn't in a program like that where it's mostly, I did international politics and international relations and whatnot. So it was pretty evenly, I think, boys and girls. Like, I don't recall it being. Yeah, that's interesting. That's very, very interesting. So you pushed through.
I did. I pushed through.
And you didn't lose your faith or anything. You just kind of.
I did. I actually did lose my faith.
That was at that moment. Okay, so tell us how that happened.
So it was just really. I remember one of my classes. I went through, and we were supposed to look at how organizations can be oppressive towards people, and I wrote up this paper and how the control can really damage people's individuality and their souls and all this kind of stuff. I don't remember the culture of organizations, the rules, the authority, all this kind of stuff. So I wrote that paper, and then we were supposed to take in an organization. And put it up against this and to say, how does this fit with this? And I took the LDS Church as an organization.
Uh-oh.
Right? And I compared them, and I was like, wow, this church is sucking the life as an organization out of people and really standing in the way of spiritual progression, spirituality.
So what were the markers? Like, what specifically did you find, to back up those claims that you were making about the church?
Well,
Because,
it was,
how could you see it being in it, and still active and whatnot? Because I found that we tend to, and I don't know how it's done in the brain, but we compartmentalize, and a lot of time when we look at other organizations, we see clearly what's wrong with them.
right.
But then when we look at our own, it's like we don't see it, especially if or you somehow maybe subconsciously justify all the the things that should be noticeable. So how were you able to see that to put the mirror basically into yourself and
right,
your organization?
What's interesting is I had always been told I came on too strong, I should shut up, I should be submissive. They didn't say shut up, but
yes, pretty much,
yeah, that something was wrong with me. And I just always had this feeling of something is wrong with me. And then as I was looking, and so it's like, it had been building up. And then I looked at the organization, particularly with women and LGBTQ, because I worked in the counseling center at the time too. And I would type out what happened in the counseling sessions.
Oh, wow. So that's pretty forward.
Yeah, I would see what was happening to lesbians and gays, particularly the gay population there, how they were being treated in counseling, and a lot of reparative therapy and aversion therapy, and and I was seeing what was happening. It's like, something's wrong with them, something's wrong with me. And then
and when you say something's wrong with them, what do you mean? Like, as far as
so they need to change. I need to change. The church is saying this. And then I started putting it together. And now I didn't 100% get it together because I flipped back again. Not a number of different times. But then I looked at it and I was like, here's this organization that is saying, do this, do this, do this. It's saying it's from God. Look at all the damage it's doing. Look at all the harm it's doing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not me. Maybe it's not LGBTQ. Maybe it's them. So I turned in this paper. Of course, I failed it because that professor was a very staunch, stalwart LDS person. But I had to go to the department chair, Bonarici, I remember his name. Awesome guy. And he was like, oh yeah, she should pass this. This is fine. And a couple other people were very supportive, and I was able to pass it. But that guy was like Mr. Peter Priesthood. He wasn't happy. But yeah, I just remember at that time thinking, maybe it's not me. Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's, and I was there before 1978, and I was always told something is wrong with Blacks. Something is wrong with them. They did something wrong in the we called it the pre-existence back there, premortal existence. And it's like, oh my gosh, something's wrong with them. Something's always wrong with everybody else. And then as I'm putting this paper together, I don't have access to it. I'd love to go back and read it. Is like, maybe it's them. Maybe it's the LDS church. Maybe it's the Mormon church. So when I turned it in and I had to go through all this just to get through the program, I was like, I'm done with BYU. I'm done with this church. I'm out. And we got jobs in Texas, and I was like, I'm done.
So you did graduate. I mean, you did, finish up that particular professor who was more open-minded kind of helped push that through, and it went, and then but it left you with a very bitter taste in your mouth, like realization that really that was it seems to me like you put all the pieces together once you dive into.
I was starting to. I was really starting to put it together, and then I would flip back to denial, which is, it's like, no, it really is the church. And part of it was, oh, something's just wrong with BYU. I was really kind of anti-BYU at that point, and anti how the church treated marginalized populations and all this kind of stuff. But then we moved to Texas. We both got jobs in Texas, and we were completely alone. We didn't know anybody.
Right.
And it's kind of like, well, we could go to church. Want to go to church?
Right.
Okay,
it's the easy, it's what you know, right? The community, how to connect with people. That's what you know.
Right. And I had immediate friends. I got pregnant right away when we were in Texas. And all these people were so supportive, and my parents weren't here. And so it was like, okay, we can kind of just put our toe in. We can be okay here.
Wait, but then at that point, your husband is kind of thinking the same as you do, or is he having that same experience, or does he listen to you and agrees, or how does he live all that, like when you at BYU and then after?
So my husband's really chill. He's very cool in terms of he was never 100% Peter Priesthood. He was just very much an intellectual, very much, this doesn't make sense. Why would we do this? Well, it makes sense that we would need a support group to get here. Yeah. And we'll just only go this far. And, so it was always a discussion. It was always this makes sense. It was never I've had this revelation from God.
Okay. They're very pragmatic, very rational.
Yeah. And he's always been that way. And so anytime we have a discussion, it's like, that just makes sense for us. I'm the more emotional one.
That's easy. I mean, when you think about all the people struggling right now, I mean, I can see them, when one in, one's out, and it can create really big conflicts. So it's really nice that you were kind of on the same page from the beginning.
Yeah, we always have been. It's just, it's never been an issue for us. And so when I look at other people, I'm just like very grateful that that's a thing that's been okay. But when we got down here, we'd been down here for a year, and he lost his job at General Dynamics. They laid off 10,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And he was laid off. And one of the priesthood leaders told him it was his fault because he wasn't as righteous as he should have been.
Oh, that is horrible.
And that I wasn't a righteous LDS woman. And I was like, what the?
So what about the 10,000 others who are like, because they're not Mormon or something? I mean, that makes no sense.
It was a horrible experience, and he just berated us horribly. But then my husband got another job, and we moved the other side of Dallas-Fort Worth, and we were just kind of like, let's just start all over again. And we moved when I was 2 weeks before I gave birth to my baby, my first baby, who is now 28.
Yes.
And the ward had been contacted by the other ward, and so they came in and they were like, hey, how can we help? And we were like, it'd be nice to have help. So they were warm, they were receptive. It was actually a really good ward. It was lower socioeconomic level. The bishop was a nurse. The really sunny president was a lesbian.
Oh, wow. In your ward?
Yeah. She wasn't out, but she was
like
single.
Did you could tell without her coming out,
right? She didn't come out to everybody. There were a few, and she was single, and
interesting.
The ward was just so different. And then they called me to be Young Women's president because they wanted somebody with a mind who could help the young women have goals, and it was just a very different,
like progressive, it seems like.
Extremely, but very talked down about in this stake because it was lower socioeconomically. It was seen as a lesser ward, but I actually really enjoyed it because I found people very accepting, and money, the whole gospel of prosperity, of that the richer people are being blessed, and so they're given the higher callings and stuff. That wasn't a factor. And I actually found it a really good place to be.
That's nice.
Yeah, so we stayed there a couple of years. Not that it was convenient, but it was
Yep.
just comfortable. It was just
Yeah, that's how I feel about my ward in Switzerland. That was, I mean, I still love all of the people who were in there. Like, I have no issue. Like, I might have stayed active, even not believing, because my bishop was like, okay, well, you're a good person. Here, do you want to do this? He almost didn't care. I mean, he didn't understand my faith crisis, and he wasn't bothered. I was rattled, like, because he didn't know like what was going on, and but he wasn't fearing me like the people here feared me. Once I came to
right.
Texas, I was like, oh, there's poison among us. He
Well,
just kept on loving and being kind, just like it did not make any difference. And it was weird to
yeah,
me because I was like, isn't he gonna tell me I'm wrong? Or like he would not even say I'm wrong. And
that's
that was, and he didn't know anything about the essays and anything. Like I think he kind of enjoyed staying ignorant with some part of it. I mean, he was the bishop. He had, a fold to lead or whatever. And but the kindness of these people and the genuineness, I could have stayed, among them. I think maybe, I don't know.
well, and that's what I wonder too with this ward, because the bishop, I told him, we haven't paid tithing for a year. We kind of go off and on because the other ward that was so horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I don't care.
Yeah.
It's like, so start fresh.
Yeah.
And I have all these questions about how women are treated. And I have lots of questions. And he was like, okay, that's cool.
See, and to me, these type of bishops really embody what a church should be like. Non-judgmental, come with whatever you have. Don't try to like put people into a mold,
Yeah,
because that's how I felt here, coming here in Texas, in the war that I used to attend. And like, if I couldn't fit the mold, I had no place there, and that was very
exactly.
clearly.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Yeah.
when we were in an apartment when we first moved, just after we moved just before I had the baby, and we stayed there. And then I got pregnant with the second. It was like, okay, we need to move into a house now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we moved to a different ward. And yeah, that exactly what you're talking about. Here's the mold you're supposed to be in. You're not fitting it. You're a mother with 2 children. I went back to school to
Mm-hmm.
start working on a master's degree, which the ward with the really cool bishop, they were like, oh, that's awesome. How can we help you find childcare? And,
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
awesome. And then I moved to this new ward. It's like, you're doing what?
Mm-hmm.
You've got two kids now. You're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be home with those babies. And
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so I continued on with the master's and started working as a counselor,
And do
therapist.
these babies love you today?
Oh, I hope so. I sure love those babies.
I'm sure they do. You had dinner today, you told me, over Zoom. They
we
love
did
you.
we did have dinner over
They love
Zoom.
you. So
Yeah,
this is for the mother out there who feel guilty because they want to pursue their education or career, whatever, and always have that lingering guilt that, oh, I'm not there, I'm not doing this and that. Kids are going to be fine. Love them, when you're with them, love
Mhm.
them, care for them, but don't erase yourself. I think
Right,
that's the
and that's
thing that
where
people
I
can
got a
do.
lot of
Don't erase
criticism.
yourself.
Yeah, that's where I got a lot of criticism because I continued on with the master's and working. And then I ended up having a third child, or my husband and I'll give him some credit there.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I would get a lot of that criticism, but I felt so much better going to school, working with other people. It was a really good fit for me. The only place it didn't fit was with the church and the church members. They were not happy with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Although they wanted to use my skills all the time. I mean, the bishop would call me and say, so listen, we have this person, because it was counseling degree that I was working on. We have this woman who's suffering from this and dealing with this. Can you just start visiting her weekly? I'm like, I'm not her therapist.
Yes, or like, did I like sign up to volunteer to be?
Right?
This is a very interesting thing that they'll use you and your skills when it's convenient, yet some will judge you for
Right. And
seeking
anytime I would
that
set those
expertise.
boundaries, they just weren't happy with it. And they would, I served in every calling that they would want me to. But, they would always want more and more and more from me. And I even did groups. I would do weekly groups in my home with women in the ward because they wanted somebody to work with the depression that was happening in the
Right.
ward.
And I had a friend who did that, and it was so taxing. I mean, I could tell that. I mean, as much as she loved, helping people, and it's just there was no balancing, and it was too much,
Right.
and I could tell that she was just worn out.
Yeah. And then at that point I left again. I mean, there's a number of times because I just felt the criticism so strongly. We had a Relief Society president who was just a horrible woman, just and so critical of almost every woman, just this gossip woman. And it was a horrible place to go to be at church. And I just remember one Sunday, we had a flat on the way to church, and my husband's out changing the tires, the tire of the car, and you see all of these people driving by,
And no one stopped.
not one person stopped.
See,
Not
that
one.
to me is so telling of, I mean, where I had an experience like that when I was in Utah, and it was with actually at the time, like an area authority or whatever that I knew. And I was a student, my car, I got a flat, it was on a Sunday, and I called, and I knew they weren't at church yet, but he had a meeting to go to. And I'm like, and then they tell these stories about, the preacher who goes and find the one person who's in need, and then nobody's able to like apply that. I'm like, okay,
Right?
whatever. It stayed with me. Like, I'm like, okay, this just confirms. I mean, and again, not everyone's like that. I have wonderful, wonderful friends still very active in the church who've been there for me with the ups and downs and everything else. Like, I don't want to put everyone in the same bag, but
Right. Exactly.
yeah, it's sad when it's very sad when things like that, when you witness it and you're the recipient of,
Right. Yeah. And at that point, I was just like, I'm done. My husband decided to take the kids to primary. And one day, she was 8 at the time, my 8-year-old turns to me and goes, I really missed you, Mom. I really want you back at church. And I was just like, okay, I'll go. So,
a good little missionary.
yeah. So we went back again, and we moved to another ward again, just because of the schooling and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I'd started a PhD program, and I started being a seminary teacher and all that kind of stuff.
Like
and
the early morning seminary?
Early morning seminary. I taught for 4 years in my home, 20 students coming into my home every morning when I had these 3 little
so
kids.
you were very giving, because I would have said no to that.
Well,
like,
and I was raised to whatever gifts and talents you're given, you give them to other people.
Yeah, and you don't say no when you get a calling.
No, even seminary. So, so for 4 years, every morning, my son was 4 when we started, and so 8 when we finished. And so 20 students every morning in my home. But the thing is I learned a lot.
Right.
And I learned a lot. And the students were great. I loved the students, but by learning a lot, I was like,
having questions, right? It brings up more and more questions, like you're trying to explain things. And
and so one of the things which was really interesting is I would ask a lot of questions myself, because I'm just a question asker. And which is why I think they had me teaching seminary. This is someone who asks questions and wants to give information. I don't know why they asked me to do that. Maybe they thought it'd shut me up. But as the students would ask questions, and then I was like, I can't find this anywhere. And I'd search it. And then I would ask people in the ward and in the state, and I would get such a hostile response.
Give an example, like what?
Book of Abraham was the first one that I just got such a hostile response. especially with the not the carving, but the picture. We have a carving
Right.
of it.
Yes. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. The facsimiles.
Yes, exactly. We have a carving of it my husband got from Honduras, of
Mm-hmm.
the whole facsimile. And they were like, this is not what they're saying it is. And I was like, I've never heard this before. And then the whole thing about the Book of Abraham and everything, and the students were asking, and I really asked the question sincerely.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I didn't know this. Let me go ask. Let me find out. And I started reading, and I got such a hostile response from some of the priesthood leaders and and it was just like, wow. And then every time I would ask about something, there was something about tabernacles on a hill. They got really resistant and nasty about that. Then let's talk about the different tellings of Joseph Smith's vision. How many different versions?
So what year are we talking about here? Like when you're teaching seminary and...
So I think it was like 2002 to 2006.
Okay, so that's a while ago. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was even before the CES letter.
Or the essays or anything like that.
Before any of that. And so I'm trying to figure all of this out on my own. And I'm just like, wow, this is crazy. And and Kolob, where is this place? And and horses in the Book of Mormon. There were so many questions.
So how did you come up with that? Because that was one of my ex-husband kind of dug into the horse. I don't know, because I never even, like, it never occurred to me, like, until he brought it up, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. And then you go and you're like, yeah, the reason horses then, because they came from Spain or something, or they were imported, or
right. And so this whole thing of the tapir, TAPIR,
yeah.
So I got all of these different answers. And I was like, these do not make sense. And they kept building up. And what was happening, we had two other situations happening on the side. My husband went to a Temple Recommend interview. And he was asked if he believed Joseph Smith was a prophet, and he asked if he believed 100% in the church. And my husband's a scientist. He's a practical, pragmatic kind of person. He was like, I don't think that 100% I can say that with a surety. I have some questions. And so he wasn't given a Temple Recommend that time. He always responded the same kind of way. He's not going to be any different. And they said, well, you know what, we're going to take you out of going to gospel doctrine class. We're going to put you in the missionary class? The investigator class.
Yes.
We're going to make you go to the investigator class. You're going to be taught by the missionaries. Now, my husband is a return missionary, very smart, very intelligent. And you have to go there. And as a matter of fact, we're going to make your wife go there too. And we had to be, and we weren't allowed to ask questions. We just had to sit there and...
Oh, wait, so like they kind of wanted to reteach you the gospel kind of thing, or... That's funny.
Yeah, it wasn't really funny. And I asked a question one time.
No, but I mean, it's just weird because it's like, come on, people, they know. Like, they're not like... It's not like they've never heard all that stuff. Like, what are they going to learn?
So I did start asking some questions because I always do, and I was called in by the bishop and told I can't ask questions anymore because it's causing people to question their faith.
See, but that to me, it's like no, like no. If it's a legitimate question about history or whatnot, why should we, know your religion?
Right.
And if you don't know, do research, and if give the right answers. Like, why fear of knowledge? Why fear of information? That's
and then at the same time, we had two of our daughters were teenagers and young women's, and so we had a lot of struggles with issues with the doctrines and all this kind of stuff. And the two of my daughters were teenagers, and the leadership in the church had daughters about the same age as ours. And they were very cliquish, and my daughters and a couple others weren't being invited to all their parties. And so we were like, let's just have our own parties. So we would have our own parties with the non-popular people and invite the popular clique, and they would not go, and these guys would, but then they would hear, this group over here would hear how much fun these guys had. We're trying to be very inclusive. And then all of a sudden my daughters were being called into the bishop's office, being told not to have parties. They were being given blessings, told not to have parties. And
okay, wait, stop right there. They were being given blessings. telling them not to have parties.
Yeah, unless their children were invited. So again, a manipulation of priesthood authority.
That is so strange.
Well, and
Strange.
my husband tells it, we can go to a place that we don't 100% agree with if there's support, if there's people around that can help our family, and that we can give and take. But when it started becoming abusive towards my kids, they'd done this to me for years.
It seems like you tried hard. Like you tried hard to find a place, even though you had all these things, bothering you. You still wanted, I guess that was your people, and you were still wanting to give it a try or shot and try to belong somewhere. But it came to a point where.
Yeah, it was like everything just came to the point of, you talk about the doctrine, you talk about the way my husband was treated, and myself. But I was always treated that way, and it was just like, oh, something's wrong with me, like I said before. And then my kids were treated like that. And the bishop kept calling in my oldest daughter to his office. And I told her one time, I said, you can say no. You don't have to go in. And so she told him no. And then at the same time, I think it was that week.
How old was she?
I think she was 16. I think they were 16 and 14. And the stake president had asked me to come in because he'd heard some of the nastiness of all the cliques, because his daughter was in
which is so like juvenile, right? When
Right?
you think about it, why should a stake president be involved in teenage,
right? So the
teenagers?
The stake president asked me to come in, and I said no.
Yeah.
And I told my daughter she could no, and I realized say no, and I realized I can do that too.
Yeah.
I can say no.
Yeah.
It was about that time we just decided, you know what, we're not getting support. We're not for our kids. And there was a whole hassle with the scouting program and the scout leader with my son. It was just like everything just came to a head doctrinally, for our family support. Socially, that we were like, I think we're done. I think we're done. We actually even tried to go to some other wards, because we knew a lot of different people in different wards, and we tried to go to different wards just to see, is it the social thing? And we realized
it's more than that, right?
Yeah, we tried to experiment. And so then we did what I call 20 churches in 20 days, 20 churches in 20 weeks. We went to 20 churches.
Like LDS churches, or all kind of churches? Like
all kind of churches.
Yes, because you wanted to find a church home. Like you wanted to find a home, like a spiritual home.
Because there's one true church somewhere, right? So let me find it.
You still held on to that belief.
I did.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. Interesting that you parted with the Mormon church, the LDS church, yet you still held those beliefs that there is one true church out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And then it was really interesting, because we found this Methodist church just where we live, and it was like, I really liked the leaders, I really liked the people there. It's like, yeah, this isn't bad, maybe we can take our family here. And just as we were making this decision, the pastor died. He had a heart attack that week. And then when I went back, and then I took my family back a couple more times, I realized it was just the pastor we liked.
Oh, okay. Because then it became kind of blah when it was someone else.
Yeah. And so we never really, that was kind of like the last one that we just kind of went, And then we just decided, we still did things together as a family on Sundays. We still kind of had family home evening, but not really. But it was, family gathering.
Family time, yeah.
Yeah, had a lot of family time. We actually learned a lot through the whole process, because the whole family left together. We went to churches together. We had discussions together.
That's interesting. So would you have like scripture study and things like that at home, or like would you... Like on Sundays, would you kind of make it a special day, or?
Well, and see, Sunday had generally been, we had 3-hour church. We'd go to 3-hour church. We'd have dinner together, and we'd talk about what we learned in church. And then we'd have family home evening, family scripture study. This is what we used to do. And usually spend Sundays together. Sundays were family days. Sundays continue to be family days, and we may choose a church to go to, or we may go to a park together, or we may do something different. We always still had family together, dinner together, and have discussions, and just spend time together. So
That's
Sunday
nice.
continued being the family day. We just kind of switched it from
Yeah.
Mormon family day to
That's kind of how I do it still with my kids now, and it's more like we watch TED Talks and talk about it. I mean, of course they're little, so we always have dinner together and things, but I do like having that time set aside to, you know, let's learn something together. Let's, you know, make it a point, because if you don't, you know, it's here and there, and as they grow, they just want to shut themselves in their room and be on screens or whatever. So I do like having Sunday to do that. I mean, it's a great time to just, you know, but it's, to me today, it's so much more I don't know, like effective and enjoyable. There's not the stress of getting ready and, you know,
Yes. Yeah, I
and
actually,
being all tired, exhausted. It's like, you know, Sabbath, the rest, you know, the day of rest, and you're more tired than a weekday because you're just running around and trying to get ready, and then
right.
you come home from church and you just crash. It's like,
And nap and
it
sleep.
is no
Yeah.
Sabbath. It is no rest day. You know, look at, with hindsight, I'm like, whoa, that was
See, and I actually really enjoy Sundays. It's just my husband and I home now, but I just really enjoy it, and I don't do work. It's not that I keep the Sabbath day holy, but
No, it's a good time to rest. I mean, and just take that break. I mean,
and go
yeah,
for walks
yeah,
and eat dinner together, make a nice dinner, or go out to eat,
yeah, yeah,
or it's nice to go to the grocery store actually between 9 and 12 in the morning because everybody's at church,
yes.
nobody's there.
No, I thoroughly enjoy that. That's very cool. So then, okay, so then you all decide not to be in a church anymore. At that
Hmm.
point, you don't even know all about, like, did you ever kind of look into it, or did you ever had that time where you needed to find out, you know, is the church true, or did you have any conflict, like a cognitive dissonance conflict about, I'm leaving a church that could be the one and only, you know, where's my soul
Oh,
gonna go? Like, how did
yeah,
you manage that?
constantly.
How did you
Constantly.
manage that?
I constantly had those feelings of what if I've chosen something wrong? What if I've done something wrong? And I would have people who were in the church say things like, you know, your children are going to go to hell because of the choices you've made. My dad was horrible.
Mm,
And my husband's mother was really negative. Um, my mom ended up dying 10 years ago, like I said, which was like 3 years after we left. And my mother-in-law told me that my mother died because I left the church, that I
oh,
basically
that
murdered
is
her.
the most horrible thing anyone can say.
And it was a horrible thing. It was really hard. And thank goodness my husband was just like, no, she died on an operating table. She was in surgery. So,
Mm.
but countering those
I mean,
kind of things,
it add trauma to trauma. That's just
right?
horrible to say. That's just because you may even you going there in that direction in your mind, in your brain, is damaging, you know,
Absolutely.
because
But
you start asking yourself questions, and I know from having been there not too long ago, you know, how damaging. I mean, and we'll come back to that, the because all throughout your story I see you pinpointed spiritual abuse all along, you know, and that's going to be our part two today of what we're going to talk about. um, but I can see, you know, the sprinkling of that all throughout your story.
yeah, it really helped that I was getting my doctorate, though, and I was working with people in counseling. Not that I was getting my own counseling at the time through the work that I was doing, but I was seeing things the whole time. And I was also seeing my three kids were flourishing and growing in ways that they hadn't while they
Mm,
were in the church. They had more room to expand.
mm-hmm.
I mean, it was really hard with my first, who was 16. She was valedictorian. She was National Merit Scholar. She actually got full scholarship to BYU, and BYU was the only place to go
Oh,
when you're in the church. And
okay.
then all of a sudden, it was like, no, we don't want her going there. And
Mm,
this whole field opens up. She can go so many places. And she ended up going to SMU, Southern Methodist University,
Very
full
good.
presidential scholarship,
Yes.
really good school. But I started seeing my kids really flourishing. And I also saw, and this is kind of a weird thing, maybe it's not a weird thing, but you know how we were told that you can have answers to prayer when you're outside of the church. But it's only to get you in the church. Real answers to prayer only come when you're a member of the church. And I saw that I was still having that peace. I was still having positive experiences. I was still, and I wouldn't say answers to prayer because I really don't know what it is yet. I don't know where I am spiritually, to be quite honest. But I was still having those positive affirmations. I was still having that peace, and I was out, and it was okay.
Yep.
And my kids were doing okay.
Yep.
And I was still able to help people through counseling actually much better than when I was in the church. I wasn't being controlled. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was always angry because of what people were telling me.
Right. You were really relieved from all the pressure and the anguish of having to deal with all that noise and all that, you know, gossip and all that. I mean, it's just noise. It's just noise.
Even though there was the cognitive dissonance, and every once in a while, what if it is true? Not as much as I used to. It was like, look at how much is happening. There's so much better over here. I would even make lists of what would it be like, what do I miss from the church? What do I not miss? And I would just, you know, because every once in a while, it's very lonely leaving the church and losing that support, and losing family members.
Yes, and it goes back quite a bit for you too. And so, I mean, your parents are both convert, right?
Yeah, they were both converts.
But still, it's all you've ever known as, you know, a child and growing up and your whole life. So it is a loss. It's a real loss.
And my husband's family, they go back to the pioneers and coming over from England and crossing the plains. And so both sides, that's all we've known. So losing all of that, that's probably been the hardest part. But then I look at, you know, and it's like, oh, do I want to go back to that? But then I look at how my kids are doing, and and how I'm doing, and how my husband's doing. And
there's an interesting thing that I heard as I'm listening. You know, I'm listening to different, you know, counselor and therapists and people giving counsel on how to cope right now during COVID-19 and whatnot, and this tendency of that people have to go back to familiar pain.
Yes.
You know, while if they feel alone or they feel trapped, they don't know what to do. So, I think there is a bit of that. And I remember also when I was transitioning, always looking back over my shoulder. You know, I was walking out, but looking back for a long time. I was looking back, am I doing the wrong thing? Or am I, you know, should I be there? And, you know, but then my conscience and my gut feeling was pushing me forward. This is the direction you need to go, you know, not that it's going to be easy, but that's your truth that you need to follow. And so, I guess, you know, the seekers find what they seeking for. I don't know, like their truth, and you know.
So, well, and it's interesting because I actually left because I believed the very things that I was taught. I believed in family. I believed in loving one another. I believed in treating everyone with love and respect, and giving of yourself and your talents. I believed in these things, and yet I didn't see them supported in the Mormon church at all,
or not supported in the way that you wanted to express it, because you know it's always you grew up, you know, with the young woman and developing talents, but it's these talents, they're very well, I don't know if you have the young woman personal progress, and I mean everything is written out for you, and what you should do and how to do it, and you're going to learn how to sew and be a homemaker and this and that, and you know, and I'm sure things have evolved and changed, because it does, you know, little by little, but from what I remember, and I embraced it all. I swallowed it all. I was like, I loved the security of knowing exactly what I was supposed to do, my path from the moment I could understand the gospel all the way until I was going to die and after. Like, to me, it was so comforting to know the whole way, because it gives you a certain confidence that you know where you're going. And but then it's also, it's all dictated. I mean, I don't know how to, it's this path and nothing else. And that's how it's going to be. And if you don't, then it's just not the way, and
Right.
some
Here's
people can
the
be in that
path.
box. Yeah. Some people
Yeah.
cannot. I could, at some point I just started choking, and
Yeah.
I had to get out.
Yeah. It's
But
this
it
path. You
works
got
for
to be on this path, and that's the only way. And if you stray from it, we got to get you back on that
yeah,
path.
and it works for many people. I can see,
Sure.
it's so this is a good time, I think, to turn into, so we're going to segue into how much, what you learn along the way. I mean, even from the time you're at BYU, like, you're starting to, open your eyes to certain things and whatnot, which anchored you in that field. And today, tell our listeners who you are today, what you do today, because I'm fascinated. And what brought you into that sphere that you study, you teach, and then I'll ask you more specific questions. But first of
Sure.
all, yeah, just kind of.
Sure. So I'm a professor at Southern Methodist University. I'm in their graduate counseling program. I do research with spiritual abuse and religious cults, and I have a private practice in Texas here. I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor. I'm a certified clinical trauma professional. I'm a nationally certified counselor. So I spend my time working with people who are coming out of religious cults and who've dealt with spiritual abuse. So it ended up, I did my dissertation on people coming out of religious cults. I didn't identify the Mormon Church as a cult at the time, but I was identifying the behaviors and the things that were happening to people as they were coming out of religious cults. And because I had a number of clients in East Texas that were coming out of that. And then the more I did the research, the more that I saw, wow, this fits with my own background.
See, that is fascinating to me. That, so at that point, you haven't even dug into, like, the history and the, like, from the church, right? You have your own experience, which wasn't great, and that's what keeps you out of the church. But you haven't at that point, from what I understand, really dug into the history, or had you?
I had dug into the history, but I had dug into it with all of the platitudes that everybody had
Yep.
given me,
Yep.
not with the understanding of, oh my goodness, this
Yeah.
is some BS right here. You know,
Uh-huh.
the wives for Joseph Smith and the
Yeah,
14-year-old
you didn't
girl.
have that, because it seems like you, I mean, you understood that from these patients. I mean, from your clients coming out of, cults, maybe a bit more acute. I don't know where they're coming from, but you must have seen, their experience and what they're coming with to you, and then you started looking a bit more at, this is very similar from,
Yeah,
or
so I
some of
was
the things are.
Yeah, so I was seeing a number of clients, three in particular, that I was like, wow, they have really similar kinds of things. They didn't say, oh, I'm in a cult. And
Mm-hmm.
but I started looking at it. They were having similar things. And I started looking at it. I started researching it. There was no research to talk about people born and raised in these kind of religious cults. I started writing about it. I started researching. I started deciding, oh, I want to do my dissertation on it. And then, yeah, it was just this really weird process. I was already in the process of leaving the LDS church, but it just, and more able to look at things instead of accepting the dominant narrative of the church of saying, this is why I have faith, blah, 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 of being able to turn that and go, oh, no, that's some bullshit right there. Sorry, can I say that on there?
Yep. It's an adult podcast, so I'm
so,
good.
so it was all kind of coming together. And then I published my dissertation. I finished my dissertation in 2012. I was officially out, I think it must have been 2008. So, it was just kind of like this process of pulling it together. And at the end, of doing my research, I added a couple LDS people into ex-LDS people into my research just to see, does this fit? And it
Yeah.
did. It
Wow.
really did. So yeah, so I published that, and I started writing about that, and started doing more work on coming out of religious cults. And then, even though I didn't call the LDS Church yet a cult, I kind of called it fundamentalist, high demand organization, high intensity faith group. But then the more I started looking at it, that's kind of what I started working with. And now I'm working more on spiritual trauma, religious trauma. But also at the same time, all along I've been working with complex trauma, domestic violence, family violence, all that kind of stuff. And it kind of all flows in together.
So trauma in general, and then you added the field of religious trauma or spiritual abuse. And that's because, to be honest, when you approached me, for the SMU conference, and we'll talk about that, like, I had never really heard that term, I don't think. Or although I understood it, because I get what it means and whatnot. And so I was a bit uncomfortable with it at first, because I'm like, to me, it's such a strong word. And unless you've been, physically, sexually, veteran, like I put the abuse and trauma more in, with these very extreme type of experiences. But because, for me, my faith crisis was super painful, because it's a ripping of who you are, who you were, your foundation, what you build your life around. And so it's super painful, but I never fully understood it as a trauma that I went through. And when you look at it, it's everything. You go through the grief and the bargaining and the, all the 5 stages are, you go through all of that. And so could you explain to our listener, like what do you understand, or what do you mean by spiritual abuse? Like, how would you define that?
Well, really, it's abuse or trauma in the name of a religious or a deity. It's about control. It's about that they have the right to control you and tell you what to do in the name of religion or spiritual deity. Like, God says that you have to be this way. God says you have to do that. And they say that they're speaking for God. So actually, it can come from 3 different ways. It can come from an abusive, sociopathic, narcissistic leader. That you can just have a leader like who may sexually abuse, who may physically abuse. So this leader may just be a crackpot, okay? And we've seen that happen, and it's like, well, yeah, we get that one. Then there's doctrines. Doctrines in and of themselves can be used to control, manipulate, and hurt people. So doctrines that they had about Blacks in the priesthood before 1978, that they were lesser, or about women that they just need to have it. And I love my babies. I believe, they're wonderful, but they shouldn't have babies, and that's their role, and they need to submit to men, and they shouldn't talk in church or pray or whatever. That's abusive and controlling and manipulative, especially the doctrines about LGBTQ population, how manipulative and hurtful and painful those are. So you can have doctrines, and then you can have narcissistic controlling leaders, but then you can have leaders who use the manipulative tactics of using the doctrines. And it doesn't even have to be a leader. It could be like a parent. It could be somebody is using these doctrines to control and abuse in some way. So, and the reason it's such a difficult and hard thing to work through is that they're saying God believes this, that this is coming straight from God. This just isn't me. I'm just the conduit through which this deity speaks. So like my father constantly, I'm doing this for your best good. I'm dragging you to church because of this. He beat my oldest brother one time because he didn't want to go to church. I'm doing this for your best good. I'm going to drag you kicking and screaming to the celestial kingdom, was what he used to tell us all the time.
Wow.
And so that is an abusive, manipulative man who is using doctrines of the church. So And you can tell a lot of the things that happened to me.
It's interesting because as you're speaking, I mean, I have people flashing in my head where that behavior was Lila Tuller. She had Mormon stories that I listened to recently, and her father was a general authority, and that was the attitude. Like literally, I'm gonna drag you kicking and screaming, and
Yeah.
don't walk the walk, and physical too, which is incredible. And the more power you give them, the more they feel entitled. And not to say that all of them are like that,
No.
but I have seen among the people I know or I have observed, in whether it's in my church in when I was in Belgium or here in the US, or I've seen this over and over. I have seen this over and over. And I guess maybe that's the reason why they would always kind of bring it up at priesthood meeting, because I remember, I read all the priesthood talks. Like I was so zealous. Like we weren't there, but as soon as they were in the ensign, I would read them. I would read all the priesthood, and there was a lot of talks about abuse of power, don't use your power,
Oh yeah.
But why is it that, why do you even have to do that? Like where is the problem? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like you have this is rampant. I just talked to a friend she's born, raised, pioneer descent, still active even, said my father was totally abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it all around me, she said. And she grew up in Idaho or something, and where does that come from, if not what you're being taught, that or I mean, because other groups don't have that problem,
Well, and they do, because if you look at the Ephesians scripture, I think what is it, Ephesians?
I guess, yeah, I take this back. Other groups do have that problem. I'm talking about non-religious groups. Some don't. I mean, it's a human thing, but I mean, because I'm thinking, whether it's whatever fundamentalist religion, whether it's Muslim, Orthodox,
and
Jews,
it's
whatever.
This whole submission. The other thing that and the shaming and the it's such a visual thing in the church of who's doing well and who's not, who gets the temple recommends and who doesn't. I remember my dad telling me a story one time of, he was in the High Council and he went to a High Council meeting, and the guy who was kind of leading some kind of lesson put half on one side, half on the other. And he said, okay, you guys have all your kids in the church. You don't. What are they doing wrong? And what are you guys doing right? And I think it's such a visual thing of people seeing and feeling like that they have a right to tell other people what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, and feeling shamed and
the shame and the guilt is really the underlining motor of
who gets the callings,
and pride. And pride.
Who's going to the ward temple night, and they don't have their temple, and what about bishop correlation meeting or whatever they call it now? They're talking about people in the ward, and so I remember my dad felt it very acutely, especially because my uncle was the stake president, and then he went on to be the temple president and stuff, of this total judgment all the time of he's not in a good enough calling, he lost his job, which means God is telling him he's not worthy, and just and this comparison all the time. And I remember another time a couple yelling and screaming at each other out in the parking lot, and that he's just screaming at her. And then he says, now you pull it together and we're going to go in there. He didn't know we were.
Right.
You pull it together and we will be the good Mormon couple. And they both walk in there and she's got the babies and, and they just walk in all happy.
Yeah, I know. And that's what bothered me. Like this, like not being able to express fully yourself or how you feel, because there's this whole appearance, or people shaming their kids, or like just not good.
Well, and Fast and Testimony meeting was all about who could be more spiritual and who's getting up there. It's such an appearance of different things. So I want to tell you these 4 categories. Dr. Catherine Keller did a big research project, and it's a very, very new field talking about spiritual abuse. But she talks
Yes.
about 4 things. One, there's an abuse of power in spiritual abuse. So punishment, rituals, neglect, shaming, all the things that we're talking about. Then there's this conditionality. And I think this is so true of the LDS church of you are not seen good unless you do this. So like the temple recommend interview, everything is conditional. Callings. That's the appearance thing. You have to look good. You are not good enough just by being. You have to constantly be doing, which leads to this real perfectionistic attitude. I'm just not good enough. And actually with this cult of confession where you have to confess constantly with these temple recommend interviews, and the youth having to go in and confess every 6 months, somebody is always standing in the way of your relationship with God. And then there's the third thing is suppression of expression. You're not supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to have faith. You're supposed to doubt your doubts. And a lot of people with that will end up with physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, neck pains. They'll end up, they can't express it verbally. So,
Oh my word. As you're speaking, I have all these people flashing in my head that I've had this conversation with, and exactly that. I mean, the physical symptoms you're talking about, I mean, people repressing, the guilt, the shame, and then comes out, I mean, it becomes mental illness, a lot of times.
Exactly. Utah has one of the highest depression in women states. And I think that has a lot to do with that. Depression is anger turned inward. It's all of these things turned inward that we have pushed in that we can't express. That, we're not even supposed to be angry.
And I have literally all these people flashing in my eyes that I've talked to, and we address these things because I've talked to hundreds of people by now since 2015 when I came out, and because I was so public, and I didn't study all these things, but I can confirm, and this is why I'm so excited that you are one of the pioneer kind of digging into and creating a path for research and equipping the therapists to deal with this, because it's ongoing, it's needed, and I feel like not a lot of maybe therapists know about it. I mean, because they're unfamiliar with it, and so
that's why we were trying to do this conference before the pandemic happened.
Yes.
We were going to do a conference at SMU and have and talk about spiritual abuse. We were calling it Spiritual Abuse 101, recognizing, preventing, and healing, because most therapists don't know about it. Because one of the things that happens when you have spiritual abuse happen, and it can happen anywhere from any church to a religious cult. It can happen in your Methodist church down the street to a religious cult that we're talking about. But the thing that happens is there is a spiritual injury, and people don't feel comfortable, and they get very triggered when like down here in Texas, come to my church, we'll heal you.
Yes. Okay, so I interrupted you before we go there. Sorry, because you stopped at number 3. You were
so the
4.
fourth thing is spiritual injury, and with the
Okay.
spiritual injury, you don't trust your own instincts with your own relationship with the deity, with nature, with God, whatever. So for example, the LDS church tells you, sure, find your own answer. And then you get an answer that's different. And then it's like, no, you're wrong. Go back and pray again.
Yeah, because it doesn't line up with my answer.
Right.
Or the book's answer, or the prophet's answer. Yes.
Right.
Very confusing. Very confusing.
Find something that that supports it, and so you stop trusting yourself. And so it's learning. So really, you do have to. There is a spiritual injury. There is this. How can I trust a relationship with God? How can I know that something's going on? And that's what I was saying when I left. I found my relationship with the deity, or my relationship with peace, was clearer.
Yes. Yes.
Somebody wasn't in the way. It wasn't conditional, and I didn't feel
Yes.
the anger, and I didn't feel the insecurity. But helping people who have dealt with that, so talking about counselors, they don't know how to deal with this. Their answer is
Right.
come to church.
Okay,
Or I don't want to. Go
I'm
ahead.
gonna interrupt you one more time. Can you repeat the four the four, and it's Dr. Keller, you said, who came up
Yeah,
with
Catherine Keller. Dr.
Catherine
Catherine
Keller?
Keller. So she talks about there's an abuse of power, which
Mm-hmm.
everybody talks about. You know, everybody thinks of spiritual abuse as sexual abuse,
Right,
but
or yeah,
or
physical, or
beating or
yeah.
physical. There is some kind of abuse of power where they use their power to control.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is conditionality. You
Okay.
can't, everything is, you have to pay your tithing to get to the temple in order to get to the celestial kingdom.
Right. Yeah.
So everything is conditional. You can't just be. The third one is suppression of expression.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ask questions. Your denial of your wants and needs, and that leads, to physical symptoms often,
Mm-hmm.
or depression or mental health
Yes.
issues. And then the fourth thing is there is a spiritual injury,
Mm-hmm.
and you just do things out of rote, or you don't trust yourself anymore.
Or get in a very dark place because you don't know what to believe anymore, or yeah. I mean, I can see all of that. So sorry. So we're going back to the therapist, and how your mission, goal, quest now is to really dig into that and educate, and with your department and other organization, tell us about what you guys are doing.
So we tried to put this lovely, what do you call it? This lovely program together, day-long program with 9 people coming in to speak, including you, and also talking to pastors. How do you create an environment that is not spiritually abusive, where you don't become controlling, where you allow this freedom of expression and connection with the deity or whatever? How do you create that? So we put this program together for survivors, for therapists, and for pastors and pastors in training. So we're going to do it hopefully again in September, but we also put some webinars together this past week.
Right, which is wonderful. I think it's so great and progressive to bring all these different people together, the people who've been abused by religion, the people who give the religion, the people who try to help the people who've been hurt, all together to come to an understanding. Because at the end of the day, it's not like tomorrow people are going to stop believing or stop going to church, or not all of them. Like it's
Right.
declining, which I'm, personally, I'm glad. Like I hope and wish for a world with no religion, but just kindness, and just, love yourself, love your neighbor, and leave it at that. And don't try to be right about how we're going to get the key to heaven. But that's just me. But I think it's beautiful that you're working to bring all of these different people and groups, and who have different objectives or different experiences, in order to have greater understanding. And bottom line is for healing, to help people heal, to help people help properly, like for the therapists, so they know how to approach these people, and for the preachers and the priests to stop, if they can, the abuse, or however they deliver their message, that they need to switch and switch. Because I do believe there is good, pastors and preachers and religious people out there. It's not like they're all evil and out to, destroy everyone. There are good ones, but unfortunately, that's my personal belief, with human nature always becoming more and more hungry for power or greed or whatever it is, it often falls down to, it just deteriorates to something negative.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can see it throughout. It's sad for the good ones, but the bad ones make the whole thing not too desirable, in my opinion.
Well, and one of the interviews I just did was with a pastor here in Dallas, and they had a vote at his church to be inclusive of LGBTQ individuals, and a third of the congregation said, no, we shouldn't be. And they chose to make it inclusive, so that third moved somewhere else, and that third was very rich people who could bring a lot of money to the church. And he said to me, but it was so worth it
Mm,
because that third can find a church anywhere that's going to welcome
mm-hmm,
them,
mm-hmm.
whereas the LGBTQ community cannot.
Yeah.
Probably only less than 5 churches in Dallas that are welcoming,
Uh-huh.
and so I want to provide that place that is welcoming. And I got kind of choked up thinking,
Yeah, this is the type of, integrity and truthful, true religion in a way,
yeah,
but
exactly.
but
That's how
it's
I
so
saw it.
rare. It's so rare in my opinion.
Right, that they lost a lot of money, they lost a lot of congregants, but they opened it up because they wanted people who aren't usually welcome to be able to
Hmm.
come in. And I just thought, yeah, that's what religion is. That's true
That's what
religion.
religion is about, and
Right.
it's so sad that it's hard to find.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
most are focused on, other things and serving each other and looking good, and it's just sad to me.
Yes.
And anyways, but I'm glad that some are doing it, and I know there are many out there, but it's still not, it doesn't outweigh the number who are not doing it right. And but it's to me wonderful that you guys are working on bringing all these people together, because hopefully that message gets more and more out there, that if they're
Well,
gonna
yeah.
still be there, like at least try to inform them on how not to hurt others.
Right. So for me, it's all about educating people. So
And
let's educate the
hmm.
pastors. Let's educate the therapists. Let's help them understand. So when I was doing an interview with a therapist, some people were kind of asking questions in, and they said a couple of the questions where I went to my therapist to try to deal with spiritual abuse, and all my therapist said was, "Well, if you would come to my church, well, if you
Mm,
would just believe this way." And so
hmm.
that's why one of the reasons we want to educate
Hmm.
is, well, that's inappropriate for a therapist to do that.
Right, right,
But
right.
here's some ways that therapists can actually work with that spiritual trauma, that
Yeah.
spiritual abuse, without creating more trauma in the process.
Especially because, I mean, I would argue, and maybe I'm wrong, but here in Texas, there's probably a lot, like a high number of religious therapists. And so,
Yes.
how do you, and I know they know they're not supposed to bring in their religion into the mix, but that if they have that missionary fever, that it can be detrimental as well. So,
Well, and as a who teaches, and I know my ACA code of ethics, American Counseling Association code of ethics, I need to keep, it specifically says, I need to take my morals and values and put them here. I work with where my client is. I
hmm.
don't put them on my client, and
Hmm.
I don't discriminate against them. I keep those separate. And
Hmm.
we do lots of case studies, and we do like,
Hmm.
but I know that it still happens because religion is just one of those things that this is near and dear, this is a professor, this is different, and then they start splitting the whole science and
Right, right, right.
psychology versus my religion.
It's so scary for me to think about someone who maybe, in this case of spiritual abuse, going to a religious therapist and not receiving the proper counseling because that person would already be biased.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially LGBTQ individuals who have been
Hmm.
abused within their perhaps fundamentalist religion. And,
Right.
and a lot of them, I've done some research there, a lot of them will go to Christian therapists who
Ugh,
come from the group that they're in, and then they get abused all over again.
ugh, that's just,
One of the interviews I did was called Repairing the Repair,
mm,
from
mm-hmm,
reparative therapy of Pray the Gay Away and doing all
mm.
these things to try and get rid of that, doing that religious therapy that is inappropriate. Yeah. I mean, not all religious therapy is inappropriate, but reparative therapy is where they try to pray the gay away and do all these horrible things to.
Yes, yes, yes. So again, I'm really so how is it, I mean, it's pretty new, but how is it received by, you know, so far? Like I don't know how far you've tried to reach, but is that welcomed, the addressing spiritual abuse? I mean, do you feel
Yes and
like
no.
yeah, because I'm,
So,
I'm I'm wondering about that, because already the name is, to me, it's a strong term. Like when I
right.
first heard it, I'm like, whoa, that's really
Yeah.
strong. And I can't imagine, I mean, it's great that some pastors, agreed to come and be a part of the conversation, but I can't imagine many religious people hearing that and, wanting to dig into it or,
Well, and
learn
it
more because
well,
they'd feel attacked like right away.
well, yeah, and that's part of it. So immediately, so probably within a week, we had 125 spots open for this conference. Within a week, all of the spots were taken, and it filled up so fast. So
Mm-hmm.
there is an interest, and people are very
Oh,
interested. And we're
yes.
talking about therapists, we're talking about people who are in school learning to be pastors, very, very open to it. I tell you where the resistance comes from. I'm a part of a board called it's a national board. It's called a CERVIC, Association for Spirituality and Ethical Religious Values in Counseling. They have tried so hard to bring spirituality into the counseling realm, to say, hey, let's have these conversations, which I'm 100% for. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
let's have the conversation about where the client is coming from, in terms of their religious values. Let's talk about it. And perhaps there's some harm there. The part that they have a really hard time with is it's all good, no harm. We can't say there's harm. We worked so hard to get that there. So a lot of people who are in power have a really hard time with it.
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
lot of resistance in terms of, no, we can't talk about that because we've worked so hard. Let's just talk about the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so some suppression of expression there.
Yes, 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 yes. I mean, it's important I'm glad that, because references are good, markers are good. And so, you should always bring it up. Like if there's anything in these four categories that, that means we need to go there.
Right?
That means we
Right?
need to go there. If you can't talk about it, let's talk about it. That's the
Let's
number one.
let's have this conversation. So
Yes.
there is a struggle there, and it's really interesting. When I don't know how much time we have left, but when I went and talked to the SMU School of Theology about it, immediately when we talked about spiritual abuse, the guy in charge, he said, oh yes, congregations do abuse their pastors. And I
Oh,
was like, what?
wow. It was turned around like that right away. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And then the other thing he talked about was sexual abuse, and to have to expand it for him, it took some
Wow.
time and some patience and some energy.
That is interesting
It
that he
was really,
flipped it like that. Because, okay, what was his thing? Like, how are pastors abused?
yeah, yeah. How are pastors abused? How are pastors abused? And we're only talking about the Catholic Church and how they abuse, the children.
Yes. Oh my
So
goodness.
it was like, yeah, so there's some resistance to thinking about how they could potentially be abusive, and also resistance from therapists thinking how they could potentially be abusive or see religion as abusive. So there is
Mhm.
resistance there, but there's also openness.
Yes, well, keep pushing the way, forging the way, because I think it's so important that, this all comes to light, that, and also with academia, with research, and not just, my experience, your experience, but, quantify it and research it and, find those markers and those commonalities,
Right.
because that is going to be non-refutable, you
Right.
know?
Well, yeah, like one of my studies I've done with 20 LGBTQ youth coming out of fundamentalist religions,
Hmm.
specifically LDS and Jehovah Witness, every single one of them attempted suicide. Uh,
See,
those are
that
those are
that
the
is
kind of things
quantifiable.
those are the kind of things that just kill me,
Mm,
because I know it's due to they tried so hard to fit in,
yes,
so hard to be the person that God wanted them to be, that they were willing to give up their lives, that they were like, I failed completely. And every one of them attempted suicide. And,
yes,
and then they had to leave their church and actually leave their family to find some kind of semblance of themselves,
of peace.
some
And
kind
see,
of
and
mental
that is not okay. That is, I mean, that is what we need to bring to light.
health.
And
Hmm.
how, with the research, with the numbers, and I think there is, more and more advocate now, which is great to see. And I was late to the game because I was blinded, and my beliefs were so very orthodox, back in the days. prior 2014. So I'm definitely looking forward and wanting to participate in just putting it out there that people really need to look at the number, the science, the research, and along with people experiences, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you doing that and sharing it with
So,
other people. That's awesome.
well, you're doing the hard work of research. I told you, if you need another research assistant, I'm here. So, all right. So I think we've covered. I wanted to. I don't know what's your thoughts on this, but it appears, you know, what looking kind of, this is kind of more of a maybe worldwide, that the younger generations tend to pull away from religion,
Mm-hmm.
wanting something more accepting, where
Mm-hmm.
there is less control.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have you seen this? I mean, how do you, what are your thoughts about that? Or is it true? Is it not true? And
Well,
have you noticed?
absolutely, absolutely. Pew Research, PEW, they do research on religion throughout the world, and 23% of millennials identify as having no religion,
Mm-hmm.
or not identifying with a spiritual religion, with a religion. That's not saying that they aren't spiritual. They don't
Mm-hmm.
have spiritual connections. So yes, it's definitely pulling away from religious organizations and moving more towards individual expression of spiritual connection to nature, to
Mm-hmm.
animals, to science, to whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely moving away from this is the answer, this is the way.
So, but 23% is a small number. Uh, does that leave, you know, does that leave the 77 others as believers, or just?
Just identifying with a religion. They may call themselves Christian, they may
Mhm.
call themselves Catholic, they may call themselves Mormon.
Muslims or Jews or something? Yeah.
Yeah, so to actually, I don't know the percentage, I wish I could give it offhand, that are C&E Catholics, Christmas and Easter
Right,
Catholics.
and that's the thing. Among the 77% who would associate with a religion, you do have that percentage also that is really non-practicing, or just kind of
Absolutely.
it's like a
So
label. So, and yeah, so that would be interesting also to see, you know, the
practicing
number
and
of,
non-practicing.
yes, because
But
that,
just that it's
yeah.
moved within the past 20 years from like 7% to 23.
Okay, so that's a big,
That's a big
that's a,
jump.
yes, that's a big jump as far as no name. Like, we don't want
Yes.
to associate with anything at all.
Not even willing to say that they're Christian.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That I don't want to say that I have this, that,
An affiliation. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm not 100% sure what's happening with that, but I think it has lots to do with the control and wanting to identify their own
Yeah.
connection
Yeah.
path.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, my kids are a different story because they have husbands. I try really hard not to stir them. I mean, if I do stir them in a direction, is a questioning always direction. Question me, question everyone. I don't tell them,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if they're invited to go to church, I'm like, you decide. Like, I
Yep.
don't tell them, don't go, you know. But it's interesting. I love watching them. In fact, I want to do a podcast with them, and I'm afraid they're just going to be goofy. But just because, you know, children have such an interesting perspective on
They do.
life, and
They do.
my children, you know, I think have a very interesting perspective because they also lived in different places in the world and associated with, you know, people from different religions and culture, and so the way they see the world. I mean, of course, they have a big U.S. influence now, but having been here for a few years now, but it's just very interesting. I think there's things we can learn from them for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we never talked about COVID-19. So just as a kind of a endpoint, have you seen people struggling with um, you know, phase transition, and during this time, you know, of confinement and uncertainty, and I mean, what have you observed, like from your perspective, and being a therapist and whatnot? Like, what are the
Right.
struggles? What are the biggest
Well,
struggles that maybe?
underlying anxiety and tiredness and just exhaustion and feeling like they should be doing more during this time.
Mm,
So just that kind of underlying constantly. Um, but probably the thing, because of the people that I work with, the thing that I see the most are family members who are trying to pull them back in to
mm,
say, "See, this is the last days.
mm,
You really, this is your last chance to really come back. And if you don't now, you're going to lose out on all eternity. This pandemic is your warning." And so they're trying, my clients that I see, and I've been talking to my students, they want to love their family. They want to love their parents. And a lot of them actually have to go home because they've lost jobs and stuff like that. They want to love them, but it's again this conditional love of you've got to do it my way, and trying to set those healthy boundaries, whether they're in the home or not in the home, setting those healthy boundaries. I was reading someone's email today about how they're sending notes and letters and cards to their parents and pictures, and letting them know that they love them, but the parents wouldn't respond because they weren't
oh,
back in the church.
ugh.
So that was hard for that side, but then I'm also reading the ones of the emails of "I'll only respond to you if you come back," and just so it's
Wow.
so that
That's just hard. That's just
yeah, so
hard.
it's intensified that
Mm.
piece. You know how I mean, most people, my parents were constantly, "You need to come back to church," and my
Yeah, no,
husband's
my
parents.
mother was like that too, until she finally kind of it was interesting because she passed away a couple of months ago, and she was 83, 82. And it's interesting that she was able to have that change of mind, being as old as she was, and I mean, she was still believing. She was starting to question a little bit the church because of seeing how we got hurt. But I mean, she still had her faith and everything else, and for years, the years that she knew we were out, because I was trying to preserve her a lot. I was trying to preserve her from leaving the church and my divorce and everything else. My ex-husband being gay, like she died not knowing that. She died not knowing my
Mm,
ex-husband is gay, because she would not have been able to process that. And
mm,
I didn't want any of the relationship, because she adored him still,
mhm,
up until the
mhm,
end. Like we emptied her house, and we still had pictures of us, as an intact family. Like she never, and it's hard. I can understand, like, for a parent, that you don't want to see your kid, separate and divorcing and all that.
mhm,
But I don't know why I brought that up, but um, I could never bring myself to but she changed. Okay, that's where I was going. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment. But she she changed, and towards the end, she was being more understanding of my phase transition, and you know saying things like, I can see why you know you disagree with certain things. I've observed some things here, also, that troubled me. And she was kind of
mhm,
we were coming to an understanding. Like, it wasn't a fight anymore. But for the longest time, like, she was upset that we wouldn't pray, as we used to over the meals and things like that. And my kids were not going to church. Like, she was really worried, like really worried. And that's another thing that people just need to learn to. People who are in and see their family go out need to learn to chill about that, because stressing about their eternal salvation does nothing. Like, it really
exactly,
doesn't. It doesn't change
exactly.
them. So really, all we can do is work on the relationship, and making sure that you enjoy what you have. And aside from church and beliefs and all that, because at the end of the day, what we have is now. And I hope that people feel that more now, with all this uncertainty, with not knowing what's going to happen and how things are going to move, that people really enjoy the now and the good things in the now, and the people they care about, you know, care about them for the right reason, not because they believe this or that, or, you know, and if they're not
And
like horrible people.
that's the hardest thing that I'm seeing is that so the parents start to act nice, and so the kids are like, hey, I'll trust you a little bit. They act a little nicer. Okay, maybe this is a good relationship. Only if you come in the church. And then it's like, no, and then they start this all over again. It's this constant cycle.
Yeah.
And then it's a lack of trust. And what you're saying is so true, of just being able to appreciate people without this, I'll only love you if you're in the church, or not, or even this side, I'll only love you if you'll respect me for my decisions. It's like there needs to be the respect on both sides.
Yes,
But
and it comes on both sides too, because
you can only work on one. Like I tell my clients, you can only work on you. You can't work on them. So you can set boundaries with them, and you can respect them. But if they're not respecting you, then you're going to have to move away from that.
Yeah,
but that's so hard.
It is very hard. And I like that you said it does come from both sides, because I do remember being a pain in the butt when I was just at the beginning of my faith crisis and really wanting to shove it in everyone's throat. And that's not the way either.
It's the normal part of transition.
Yeah, and it's not the way either. It's not going to make the relationship better. But I have the feeling, and I hope I'm right, I mean, there's this going on where, of course, you know, very zealous believers want to, you know, tell everybody it's the end of the world and they need to get their act together. And then there is, I think, a bigger part of people who are really trying to live in the now and appreciate what is now, and you know, showing their better side, you know. And so, and of course, we always want to look at those who don't have that, because that's what we do. we reach out to people who are in pain and hurting and trying to help. But I don't know. I just hope that people just hang on to the good things aside from the differences, you know. Yeah. So, what's your last word to the world today?
My last word to the world. If I were to leave any words, I mean, I'm not going to bear my testimony. That's and my whole life, it's really been devoted to finding out who I am and what my talents and gifts are, and using them to help other people, and to find my true self. And really what I found through the whole process was like, if I were to give an image, it would be like a plant trying to grow up, and cement keep putting down on it. And the plant still tries to grow up, but cement keeps being put on it. And so leaving the church, what it's done for me is it's allowing me to grow. And I keep having to remove cement. But to grow so that I can be my authentic self. And as I find the anger coming back or find something triggering, it's like, okay, what's hurting me? What's not working? And so I work with my clients to find their authentic selves. I work with myself to find that. And the church didn't allow me to be my authentic self, to be my real self. And my authentic self is really about finding my gifts and talents to help others, which sounds really cheesy. But
no, I think you're right. And I think it's beautiful. In fact, as you were speaking, I love that analogy, which reminded me of when I was in Cambodia a few years ago, seeing those hundreds of years old trees that had grown their roots and their leaves and everything through stone, through buildings. And it reminds me of the resilience of humans. And I see this in all the people who are survivors or who have had the courage to leave, living community. I mean, it's painful.
Extremely.
But I'm obsessed with that. I think I can say that I'm obsessed with human resilience to find their own ways, their path, their truth, you know, despite it all. There is something about that. I just finished a very, very hard book called I Forgot to Die by Khalil Rafati. I don't suggest it for the sensitive souls because it's a very hard book. It's a very hard book. And this is one of those stories of resilience that will just, move you. It's not about religion, but it's, very bad childhood, like all the horrible thing, drug addict, and then coming out of it and a beautiful person now, doing good for others and, spreading lights basically in this world. And I talked to him like, because he's good, like he'll answer you if you like message him and whatnot, and I'm like, I'm just in awe. But to me, I just have this fascinating, and I haven't had a horrible life. I mean, I have my challenges just like everybody else, but maybe I read those stories because it helps me just put my own trials in perspective. But I do admire anyone on the small level or bigger level that is just dedicated to be their own self and live their truth and have that courage to see things for what they really are, which is so ironic because that's like a church saying, like,
Right?
things as they really are. Well, I do see them as they really are, and
Right.
it's my perspective, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna be true to that. I'm not gonna try to hide or pretend and come what may with that.
Yeah, and that's a nice thing. I don't have to pretend anymore. I can be
Mhm.
real, and I like that a lot.
Yes, nothing beats that.
Right? Even though that was the facade we lived of trying to be the real self back then, but
Yeah, it's just messed up. I mean, you remember we had a conversation not too long ago, and I was talking about just that clean up, that like spring clean in this attic that would be my life, and it was just full of junk and full of who knows what. I mean, not to say that it's all clean now, like.
no, but there's these things, just like continuing to believe that there was one true church. I had to find it. It's like, oh no, I don't have to hold on to that one
Yes.
anymore. Let's take these
Yes,
things
I
out.
mean, just that and so many other things. And,
It's so many other things.
yeah,
Exactly.
it's spiritually speaking, I think I'm okay. Other parts of my life are a bit chaotic at times, but I think that's a lot of people right now. So
I agree.
I don't feel alone in my chaos.
Right? I don't either. That's awesome.
Hey, thank you so much for doing this today. I always enjoy talking to you. I'm fascinated by your research and your study, and I'm gonna keep a close eye on all the discoveries, and I'm gonna share. In fact, if you can send me some of the info, and I can dig for it. But when you're gonna publish the webinars so that I can share that with people.
Oh yeah, that's supposed to be end of April, so
Um,
hopefully I can get those to you. Yeah.
And then whatever information you would like to share is if people want to reach out. I don't know if your practice is full or if you're still accepting,
Depends on the day.
patients. Yeah. But just whatever you want to share, I'll make sure to put that on in the notes so that
Awesome.
our listeners know how to reach out.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. I thoroughly enjoy talking to you.
Thank you so much. Here is an excerpt from Dr. Matthews and her colleague Dr. Salazar on cult survivors' experience. Researchers have become increasingly aware of the negative effects of cults on former members. First-generation cult survivors experience depression, grief, loss, and anxiety after leaving their groups, and reintegration into society can be difficult. Second-generation cult survivors also experience additional challenges. Born and raised in cultic groups, their personalities are formed in that setting, and they may have experienced trauma, neglect, and abuse as a result of their cult upbringing, with no life outside the cult as a point of comparison. Their cultic upbringing may lead to a lack of education, job skills, relationship skills, and decision-making skills, leaving survivors ill-prepared to integrate for the first time into the world outside. In addition to coping with the realities of life outside the cult, They must reinvent themselves, discovering a self no longer defined by cult doctrines, practices, and strictures. Knowledge gained from this constructivist grounded theory and social justice focused study provides counselors with essential awareness and strategies for advocating for and facilitating the empowerment of their second generation cult survivor clients to meet the challenges of adjusting to life outside the cult. Further, it provides a foundation for continuing dialogue between counselors and researchers concerning the needs of this often marginalized population. You can find more information about Dr. Matthews and the great work she's doing in the notes below. Feel free to reach out to her. I hope that in these difficult times you are holding on to resilience and that you are still able to share some of your light with those around you. I'm Juliana. This is the Faith Transition Podcast. I will see you next time.